I'm just going to briefly welcome you. So I put that there, and then I'm going to go like this, and have the commissioner is under there. I just have to remember to take mine away.
This is already, it's hot.
Oh, it is, okay.
When I call in, you guys will listen to me. I'd rather be ignored face to face. As in Rome. The benevolent, no, they said it in Rome.
We're going to get started in just a moment. If people would take their seats, please. I see the commissioner is on his way in. Okay, I see the commissioner is working his way forward, so I'll make a few comments of welcome and hand the mic over to him. I'm Julie Eklund. I'm the Assistant Commissioner in the Strategic Planning and Funding Division. Thank you all very, very much for being here today for the first of our Formula Advisory Committee meetings. As you're probably aware, we'll all meet as a group this morning. And the Commissioner will make some remarks, and then we'll be breaking up into three separate groups. The general academic institutions, the universities, are going to be staying in this room. The two-year colleges are going to be moving upstairs, and our health-related institutions are going to be right next door in the Tejas room. So I will explain that again after the commissioner finishes his remarks, and we will take about a 10-minute break at that time to let you get settled. So know that is coming. Again, we appreciate you all being here for this very important work. Just a brief overview of the cycle, and then each of you in your respective meetings will have a presentation about how the formulas work and how the schedule will work. And that is, of course, to be helpful for those of you who are new members who are just joining us. And we're very, of course, happy to see many of you returning who have done this work in the past. And I think that's really what makes these groups successful, as we have returning members who are able to share their expertise, as well as new members coming to us to bring new perspectives. It does get complicated sometimes, hang in there. But again, we're very happy to have all of you here to do this work. Folks in my division will be providing staff support to all of your teams, and I just wanted to briefly mention who they are. We have David Young, who is with us. He's actually going to be sitting in with the health-related institutions this morning. Ed Buchanan isn't able to be with us this morning, but he will be providing staff support. We have Roland Gilmore with us. He is going to be working with the two-year colleges, and we have Jennifer Gonzalez, and she's providing support to the universities. So again, thank you to staff for being here. And now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Paredes, who is going to make some remarks. Thank you. I guess we don't have another. Okay. Are you okay with that, or you want me to get?
Well, you can tell I'm in full exit mode. I said, should I put on a coat and tie? I said, hell, it's 105 degrees outside. What are they going to do, fire me? So anyway. I'm not going to say anything about the charge. But you can read those for yourself. I wanted to talk about some of the things that I've learned in 15 years as commissioner. Some of the things that I hope you will think about in the near future. I was very fortunate in picking a time to take my leave because we had one of the best sessions for higher education we've ever had. There was over $900 million in increased funding for higher education. If you look at the legislative agenda, we made some very significant steps forward in higher education policy. I think our transfer policy will make a huge difference if we implement it properly, which I hope we will. We'll have to put aside some of the differences between community colleges and universities and between institutions of the same type in order to get the work done. The key is always, and you've heard me say this over and over again, the key is always to make sure you know what your priority is. And your priority should be, or our priority should be in higher education, the welfare of students. And I think if we focus on that, we'll be able to implement facilitated transfer that's less expensive and less onerous for students and their families. We did some other things that I don't need to go into, but I did want to speak for a minute or two about House Bill 3. House Bill 3, in my view, is one of the most important pieces of legislation, education legislation passed anywhere in this country in the past 25 years. It sets a pathway. It establishes a track for children to get college ready and to fulfill whatever educational dreams they have, whether it's a post-secondary certificate in a workforce area, a bachelor's degree, associate's degree, or beyond. It's got some, I hope you will take a look at the bill. It's extremely long, and it's not exactly reading, like reading A Tale of Two Cities, but it's a very important piece of work, and it focuses on a number of things that should be of vital interest to everybody in higher education. Number one, it provides full-day kindergarten for children, which gives us something we haven't had before, an ability for children to catch up when they're still very young. Probably the biggest tragedy in education, American public education, as far as I'm concerned, is that in this country, if you either start out behind or fall behind very early, you almost never catch up. We know, for example, if you're not reading grade level, there's some studies that show you only have a 10% chance of going to college. There are studies that were done, many of you know about that famous University of Kansas study was done about 30 years ago. It's been challenged since then, but I think the point that study made is still holds. And that study found that children from poor families nationally, by the age of 4, have heard 30 million fewer words than children from affluent families. And imagine the kind of gap in vocabulary, the kind of gap in thinking skills that result from that terrible differential in opportunities that children have. We now have the instrument that can fix a lot of those problems. If you've read House Bill 3, you know that high schools and school districts will be held accountable for the college readiness of their students. That will make a huge difference. And it's very important for higher education to get involved in that. If you look at K through 12, and I'm talking about the State Board of Education, I'm talking about superintendents, I'm talking about principals, their tendency is to define college readiness on their own. without much participation by higher education, and without hardly any participation by the people who actually establish college readiness, faculty in college classrooms. You know, you can score, if we have standardized tests and you score off the charts on one of those tests and you go and take a freshman composition course at Austin Community College and you make a D, you're not college ready. So we have to make sure that we get involved and establish the standards. I was at a meeting of the state higher education executive officers about a month ago, and I spent a lot of time talking to a senior official from the U.S. Department of Education, and he said that if you look at the latest OECD data on where American students stand in comparison to other countries, he said that that American graduating high school seniors are 2.5 years behind the students from the highest achieving countries in the world. 2.5 years behind. And those are phenomena that House Bill 3 gives us some tools and I hope the incentive to address. We have got to set much higher expectations for our young people. The impact on higher education from the steady lowering of standards in K through 12 has been enormous. Some studies show that the most frequently, the most common grade in higher education, public higher education, now is an A. That can't be right. So I hope that you will, I hope that on every one of your campuses, you will take a close look at HB 3 and determine what your role is in implementing that piece of legislation. Because we will all benefit from House Bill 3 if it's implemented properly. I've been thinking a lot about what I'm going to do when I step down, and I don't know when I'm stepping down yet. We haven't. I don't know where the search is, but I've decided that probably the focus of what I do, I intend to remain active, but I think what I'm going to try to do is find a way to work on House Bill 3. That's what I want to do. I want to work with colleges and universities and determine how can we make sure this happens. You know, we've gone down incrementally, slightly, for a couple of years now in the percentage of high school graduates who enroll directly in college. We won't hit the goals of 60 by 30 Texas if that pattern continues. We've got to turn it around. We sent about 52% of our high school graduates to college. The most educationally advanced states in the country send somewhere close to 70% of their high school graduates to college. We've got to close that gap. The last thing I want to say is I've worked with a lot of people in this room, and I've always been very impressed by the quality of people we have in public higher education in Texas. I admire your commitment to the young people of the state greatly, and as I said, I've enjoyed working with the people in this room with whom I have worked. Obviously, there have been some disagreements and some tensions from time to time, but I can tell you, I worked, before I became commissioner, I had worked at the campus level. I'd been an administrator at UCLA. I worked at the system level. I was also administrator in the University of California system. And then I came to Texas and I became commissioner of higher education for the state. And I can tell you, every one of those roles is very different. And the one that's most distinct is being commissioner of higher education when your perspective has to be what is best among all the array of decisions we have to make. What is best for the largest number of students in Texas? And another thing that you find out, what is good for one university, one community college, one system, is not necessarily what's good for the entire state. I still, and I've made this comment over and over again during the last session. I'll continue to make it. I worry about the growing disparity between the haves and the have-nots. You know, we have universities in Texas, I don't have to name them, that if the state cut out funding tomorrow, they'd be fine. They would continue to enroll thousands of students. They would continue to maintain their prestige. They'll be fine. We now have more Tier 1 universities than Texas has ever had. We need to do a better job of publicizing that fact. It troubles me sometimes when somebody goes to, well, I won't mention an institution, but institutions in Oklahoma, New Mexico, Louisiana, Mississippi, and say, well, I couldn't get into institution X, so I decided that my next best bet was this institution in another state, when in fact we have institutions that are much better than those institutions outside of Texas. We've got to pay more attention to the growing disparity between the relatively affluent institutions and those with minimal resources. Because it's the ones with minimal resources, whether they're regional colleges or community colleges or regional universities, that do most of the heavy lifting. And we have to pay attention to that, and we have to make sure that they have the resources to do their work. Well, with that, I will go back to my office and keep throwing away files and so forth. And I wish you good luck with this important assignment, and I look forward to seeing you and working with many of you in the future, particularly you, Juan. One was my student. I don't mind if they're not.
Well, thank you very, very much, Commissioner. Oh, yeah.
Do you have any suggestions about how we might address this have and have? Within the state of Texas?
I think first of all, we have to know the data. We have to know what the gap is. I mean, we have gaps of, we have institutions that have 4 times as much money per student FTE than other state institutions do. And we have a number of public institutions in Texas that are just barely hanging on, and they don't have the resources. I would hope that that the strong public universities, and we know who they are, would be more attentive to the needs of the smaller regional institutions. I think we have to help each other. I think the transfer issue is a place where we can make a big difference. You know, help the institutions if community colleges or small regional universities are not producing the kinds of students that the powerful elite institutions want as transfer students, then help them improve the work of the students, help them get better prepared. But we just have enormous gaps, and once again, as all of you know, they're increasing. So I don't want to give away all my secrets because I'll be working on some of these. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Again, thank you, Commissioner. We will plan to reconvene in our separate meetings at 10:30, so that'll give everyone a few minutes. Oh, yes. Oh, did I say 10:30? I meant 1:30. We're going to give you a very long break. I'm sorry, at 1:30. I'm still focused on the morning when I had a meeting at 10:30. At 1:30, and the folks at the 2-year colleges are going to be upstairs in the Lone Star room, and So Roland Gilmore, who will be staffing that group, working with that group, would be happy to lead people upstairs now, but it's going out the back door here, up the stairs, and the room is right on the top, at the top of the stairs. So it's basically right above us at this end here. Again, that's the Lone Star room. The folks from the health-related institutions are going to be meeting in the room right next door. You can use either this door or the door at the end, and that's in the Tejas room. The folks from the general academics will remain in this room. I did want to mention that we are broadcasting this meeting and will continue to broadcast it with when the general academics meet, just so people are aware that the meeting is being broadcast. And there are restrooms right outside the door in the center of the hallways on every floor. There's a break room at the front as you walk in on the left if you wanted to pick up a water or a snack during the short break. And the meetings will convene at 1:30. Again, thank you all very, very much for coming. Okay, I'm just going to check and see if the folks who were calling in have joined us. We have Mr. Bob Brown. Are you with us on the line?
I'm here.
Wonderful. Welcome. Ms. Susan Brown, are you here? It sounds like she is not. And was there anyone else who was calling in? Okay. Well, so Karen Murray, anyone else
We'll take roll in a minute.
on the line? Okay.
It'll take them a few minutes to.
Okay. Well, I think we're ready to begin.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call the General Academic Institutions Formula Advisory Committee meeting to order. I'm Noelle Sloan from Texas Tech University, and I am convening the meeting in the absence of the former committee chair and vice chair. Please be advised that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet and recorded, so I'd ask that all attendees silence your cell phones. For those attending via teleconference, please mute your phone until you are ready to speak to prevent background noise. Thank you. We have a full agenda for this initial meeting, so let's begin. Ms. Gonzalez, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Brown?
Here.
Miss Susan Brown? Susan Brown? John Davidson? Danny Gallant? Here. Daniel Harper? Here. Harrison Keller?
Here.
Robert Kinyukan? Mr. Kinyukan? Okay. James Marquardt? Mr. Marquardt? Ms. Mendez? Ms. Murray? Mr. Munoz? Mr. Tomlinson? Ms. Sloan is here. Mr. Strauser? And Ms. Wright? Okay. We do have a quorum present.
Thank you. As a reminder, members on the call are permitted to vote, and due to the remote attendance of members, votes will be done in a roll call fashion. I'd like to welcome the committee members and thank them for their attendance. Item 2 is consideration of the election of a chair and vice chair. Do we have a nomination for a chair? If you are in favor, please respond aye, nay if you oppose, or present if you choose to abstain. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So we have a nomination by Dr. Gallant and a second by Dr. Munoz. Now, please respond aye if you're in favor, nay if you oppose, or present if you choose to abstain.
Aye.
Thank you. Do I hear a nomination for a vice chair? Are there any other nominations? Okay, so we have,
Yes.
so how do I proceed when there's 2 nominations and 2 seconds?
Do we just take a vote for each
Yes, I believe so. So we have,
There's a first and a second.
d-
Isn't there a point that any questions about the matter?
yes, there is. And it sounds like, did someone also just join us?
It was Susan.
Yes, hello. Welcome to the meeting.
Okay, so Susan, thanks for joining. We have, currently we're talking about a nomination for vice chair. We have a first and a second for Daniel Harper and a first and a second for Bob Brown. Are there any questions regarding the nominees?
The term of service is
No.
1, 2, how long?
It's just during
It's
the,
just 1 year. It's just an annual service.
And just because I am new, this is Veronica Mendez. Are these members have been here before? Have they served? I don't know them, so are they longtime members, both the nominees?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
I believe Mr. Brown served on the committee 2 years ago and has an appointment for the next committee. And Mr. Harper has just joined the committee for this meeting and moving forward with the 6-year appointment.
Here. Can y'all hear me?
We can now.
Okay. I couldn't hear the question. It had died.
it's an open floor if there are questions regarding the nominees for vice chair. And Ms. Mendez asked the question of if either had served on the Formula Advisory Committee in the past. Are there any other questions? Okay. Okay. Okay, so we have a nomination. I think Dr. Gallant nominated Mr. Harper. It was seconded by Mr. Davidson. And then Ms. Gonzalez, if you'll take the roll for the vote on that one. Again, respond aye if you are in favor, nay if you oppose, or present if you choose to abstain.
So just clarifying, am I asking for a vote for Harper or Brown, or I'm doing it just on, do you know how to?
No, I believe we need to address each, but I would also be happy to get clarification on that if you would like me to do so. So we can make sure we follow the rules of order appropriately in this process. So
I think you'd vote. Wouldn't you count the votes for one, count the votes for the other, see where you're at?
that's generally, I think you take each
That sounds good.
each at a time.
So, Mr. Brown,
Present.
I need this is okay, let me clarify. This is a vote on Mr. Brown or Harper. This is, first we're going to take the first motion, which was Mr. Harper. Your vote is either an A or a nay, and everybody's going to have the opportunity to chime in for both nominee. So first on Mr. Harper, Mr. Brown.
Hey.
What was that? Sorry.
Hey. Yes.
Ms. Brown.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Davidson. Mr. Gallant. Mr. Harper. Mr. Keller. Mr. Kinyukan is not present. Mr. Markart is not present. Ms. Mendez.
No.
Dr. Murray, did you join on the call? Okay, she said, okay. Mr. Munoz.
Abstain.
Mr. Tomlinson.
No.
Ms. Sloan.
No.
Hauser's absent. Ms. Wright. And this vote is being taken for Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown?
Abstain.
Abstain? Oh. Ms. Brown?
No.
Mr. Davidson? Mr. Gallant? Mr. Harper? Mr. Keller? Ms. Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Munoz?
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson?
Yes.
Ms. Sloan?
Yes.
And Ms. Wright?
Ms. Brown?
So the majority is for Mr. Bob Brown.
Thank you. Item 3 is a briefing on the general academic institutions funding formulas presented by Dr. Julie Eklund.
Thank you. We have a PowerPoint. It might be a little hard for everyone to see, but you should have the PowerPoint materials in your materials for the meeting today, and they can be convenient to reference. Oh, good. And we have our general counsel, and I just wanted to ask him to come down. I believe we followed the rules of order correctly. We had 2 nominations, and so we polled the group for each nomination for a vice chair for the committee. And then we added up where we were after polling. We did the first nominee and polled everyone, then the second nominee, and then Mr. Bob Brown had the most votes and so was elected vice chair.
Okay.
Did we do that appropriately?
It's fine. You've
Okay.
got a vice chair.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
It's a very compliant general counsel.
Well, that's helpful. Okay. So moving on to the presentation, and I did want to, again, remind you it's in your packet, so it might be something you want to refer back to over time. I think it's a good overview of how the formulas work, and of course, Jennifer is available to answer any questions, as am I, whether it's today or moving forward, if you do have any questions based on the presentation. So the formulas are designed to objectively and equitably allocate the amount the legislature funds to the institution. The LBB divides the funding among the institutions using the data collected by the coordinating board, so the institutional level administrative data that we collect about your students and courses. Institutions directly receive the formula funding in the GAA, and the allocations are not a budgeting mechanism. I think this is important for folks to remember. They're transferable across strategies with some exceptions, such as TRB debt service. The process is starting now with the advisory committee meetings, and this slide goes through the process. We will be meeting this fall, and you will be examining and considering changes to the formulas. Then your chairs will present the committee's recommendation to the commissioner in January. Some years the committee meets through December. Sometimes there will be a meeting in early January, but generally the committees meet monthly throughout the fall, and we always do reserve a space for a January meeting. The meeting with the commissioner is usually in late January or early February, and then in March, the Committee for Affordability, Accountability, and Planning, so this is a board committee, considers the formula advisory committees and the commissioner's recommendations and forwards modified recommendations to the board. So basically, you will put together your recommendations. They will be presented by your chair to the commissioner this winter, and then the commissioner's recommendations will be provided to the board at the January CAP meeting, but at that meeting also, your committee's recommendations will also be presented to the board. So that's an important meeting coming up in March. And then the full board will be adopting a final recommendation, Formula Advisory Committee recommendations in April. Then moving on June 4th, the board recommendation is sent to the LBB and the Governor's Office of Budget Planning and Policy. The coordinating board then submits its initial formula run, which incorporates the board's recommendations, and those are due to the Legislative Budget Board on November 1st. The initial or preliminary run will include calendar year data, so it will include data from the spring, summer, and fall of 2020, and then the appropriations bills will be considered in the winter of 2021 using this initial data. And then the final formula run is submitted to LBB on March the 1st, and it will include base year 2021 data. And so there's a shift because more data is available, so that will include data from the summer and fall of 2020 and the spring of 2021. In May 2021, the legislature will use the final data to allocate formula funding to each institution in the General Appropriations Act. And of course, the legislature makes the final determination of the appropriated amounts. So it's helpful to have the schedule for the data here because it doesn't follow the traditional fiscal year schedule that we follow on so many things at higher ed institutions. So it is a little bit different in terms of when the data is available and provided for those formula runs. Okay, formula funding is not intended to cover all expenses. Its intended uses and ineligible expenses are listed to the right of this chart. All funds formula revenues are represented in the two dark green slices on the outer ring of the pie chart. These consist of formula general revenue and appropriated tuition and fees. These amounts accounted for 18% of institutions' fiscal year 2018 revenues. So institutions reported to us through our sources and uses reports revenues of $15.3 billion in fiscal year 2018. $5.4 billion were state appropriated, of which $1.7 billion were formula funding general revenue, and $1.1 billion were student paid statutory tuition and fees. Okay, any questions on that? Oh, here, I'll leave it. So you can see the eligible and ineligible expenses are listed there, which is helpful as well. The GAI sector is allocated with 2 formulas and 2 supplements. The operation support formula supports instructional operations, and it's based on census date enrollments. Enrollments are weighted by cost. Institutions receive an additional 10% when an undergraduate course is taught by a tenured or tenured track professor. The infrastructure formula supports facility operations and utilities. It is based on predicted square feet, not actual square feet, but predicted. Smaller institutions receive an additional appropriation referred to as a small institution supplement. An institution's instruction and operations, I&O formula funding, is calculated by multiplying the funding rate by its weighted semester credit hours. Okay. The teaching experience supplement is funded using the same formula as the I&O, except the calculation is limited to undergraduate semester credit hours taught by tenured and tenured track professors. 10% of this subset is added to the amount funded for I&O. Okay, the space support calculation is a bit more complicated, and instead of weighted semester credit hours, as I said before, it's based on predicted square feet. These are the results of the space model, which estimates the amount of space an institution needs, taking into account enrollments, faculty, research expenditures, and other metrics. An institution's funding is the product of the funding rate, its predicted square feet, and the sum of 2 factors. These 2 factors are designed to shift more funding to institutions that pay more utilities. They're determined using the annual utilities survey completed by the institutions. The operations and maintenance factor is the ratio of statewide reported E&G expenditures for operations and maintenance to the total education and general expenditures. In FY 2018, institutions' operation and maintenance expenditures made up 57% of the total E&G expenditures for facility support. Therefore, the operations and maintenance factor for this last biennium was 57%. The utility factor is a complement of that, or 43%, multiplied by the institution's utility rate adjustment. The utility rate adjustment is the percent above or below the statewide average an institution pays for utilities. If an institution pays the statewide average for utilities, the sum of these two factors would be 1, and the institution's funding would be its predicted square feet times the funding rate. If the utilities run higher than average, the institution receives proportionally more funding. Finally, institutions with fall enrollment headcounts less than 10,000 receive a portion of $1.5 million per biennium as a small institution supplement. Institutions with enrollments below 5,000 receive the full amount, and the amount tapers off $150 for each additional headcount per year. For example, an institution with 9,999 headcount enrollment, 9,999 headcount enrollment, they're giving me an example here, would receive $300 for the biennium, and an institution with 10,000 would receive 0. So again, that's 150 per head count, and I assume that's double because it's the biennium. Make sense?
Julie,
Yeah.
are we allowed to ask questions or just listen?
You are more than allowed to ask questions. I should have said that at first, and I'll do the best I can to answer.
All right, I'm just curious, where did this 10,000 student population for small schools derive?
That has been in there quite a while. And historically, I don't know if Susan Brown can answer that question. She was actually worked at the agency for many, many years. Susan, are you aware on that?
Yes, originally it was at 5,000, and institutions either got it or not. So if you were at 5,001, you got 0. If you were at 5,000, you got the full amount. And so there was one of the formula advisory committees, Billy's right, 10 years ago, who decided, suggested that it be kind of tapered off, and so that it tapers off from the 5,000 down to the 10,000. But where the 10,000 actually came from is just kind of it was double what the original had been. And the original had been in place since 97, I believe, maybe before that.
Thank you. And we have seen, of course, enrollments have tended to go up, so I think that was helpful when they introduced the phase-in. Any other questions about what I've gone through so far? Okay, so in terms of looking at what happened in the latest session, the general academic institution sector received $4.94 billion in formula funding for FY 2020-21, which was a 3.9% increase over the previous biennium. There was a 3.7% increase for growth. The operations support rate increased from $55.82 to $55.85, and the space support rate increased from $5.27 to $5.33. And it's important to note that the LMARs are included for facilities, and the same with TSTCs. So when we talk about general academic institutions, in some instances and how the formulas work, our 2-year LMAR colleges and our TSTCs are included. But of course, those folks are meeting with the 2-year formula advisory committee to address their formula. But it is helpful to understand that some of their information does get included because of how they're funded. And Jennifer, at some point, if you need details on that, would be happy to provide it. Okay, and so this is just a summary of what I walked through, but with the details for the 2021 biennium. So again, if you wanted to see how it actually played out in this session, that information is provided here. Okay, this chart shows weights per weighted semester credit hours and predicted square feet from 2000 until the current. The operation support rate is up 3% from the 2000-2001 biennium, and the space support rate is down 27% from the 2000-2001 biennium. The red and green stacked bars on this chart show the formula funding general revenue, all formulas and supplements less general revenue dedicated from 2000 to current. Formula funding general revenue increased 44% from $2.5 billion for the 2000-2001 to $3.6 billion for the 2021 biennium. Institutions increased tuition and fee collections from $2.3 billion in 2000 to 2001 to an estimated $9.99 billion in 2021, a 334% increase. And then statutory tuition and fees are built into the formula, which is an important thing to remember. On a full-time student equivalent basis, formula funding general revenue from 2000 to current decreased 11%, from $7,058 for the 2000-2001 biennium to $6,285 for the 2021 biennium. Non-appropriated tuition fee collections increased an estimated 168% over this period on a full-time student equivalent basis. So, thank you.
Julie,
That's the overview. Yes.
what was that last number? 100 and, how much per, 180?
168% for the non-appropriated tuition and fee collections.
Went up.
Yes. And this is overall not adjusted for inflation, correct? Jennifer? We do show this both ways, but I don't see the adjustment here. Right, and we do have this information where we adjust as well, if you'd like us to share that.
Any other questions on the materials that Dr. Eklund provided? Okay, thank you. As the commissioner stated in his opening that he would not be reading the charges, item 4 is the discussion of the charges to the committee, and I'll start by reading each one. Charge 1 is to study and make recommendations for the appropriate funding levels for the operations support and space support formulas and the percent split between the utilities and operations and maintenance components of the space support formula. As Dr. Eklund just mentioned, for this upcoming 2022-2023 biennium, the formulas were funded at $4.937 billion. Materials were also provided in the materials for this charge. There's both a link to materials that you could have looked at the spreadsheet of the history of some of the funding, as well as what was written in the materials that provided data. Some of the things included were the anticipated growth rates in fall headcounts and space support needs, as well as the forecasted inflation rate. I would just, if I may kind of talk about this a little bit, before moving off of charge 1, is on page 10 of the materials is where the enrollment and square feet projections are located. So again, showing the growth in enrollment 2.8% and predicted square feet 4.8%. So that's one of the things this committee always does, is make a recommendation of what the next funding needs to be to support both where we're at currently, as well as predicted growth. And then we've also talked in the past about inflationary rates to be incorporated into that as well. Are there any other comments or questions based on the review of the materials? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to charge 2. Charge 2 is to review the expenditure study that is used for the cost matrix, including determining and reviewing the growth of costs affiliated with higher education and its consequent impact on higher education institutions, and make recommendations for improvements to better reflect the actual expenditures of the institutions. This is, for those of you that served on last Formula Advisory Committee. This is something that was also discussed and worked on during that time, but now it is a rider included in the General Appropriations Act of the 86th Texas legislature. And again, the coordinating board staff has provided some data for this charge in the agenda materials, including the relative weight history. Are there any comments, additional discussion, or questions regarding charge 2?
Well, I have something on charge 2. You want to go through all the charges? You want to take them?
Madam Chair, this is Bob Brown. I do have a question. This seems to be a very large charge. Are we going to contemplate a separate work group for this, or do we want to tackle this completely as a committee, or do we want to ask some folks to look at this before the full committee considers it?
Bob, I agree. This is a large undertaking to kind of look at that expenditure study with cost matrix implications, and I would be open to discussing within this committee, but I would be open to proceeding as we had last committee and having a separate working group that does a lot more offline discussions and brings it back to the full committee at our next meeting. Do others have thoughts on that?
It seems prudent to get a smaller group to dig into this a bit more thoroughly and come forth with a set of recommendations or insights or opinions about it. Not maybe, again, this is my first meeting, maybe not just related to charge 2, but the other charges.
Yeah, I would have to get an update, but I do also believe that there has been discussion among TASCUBO members as well, really looking at the expenditure study among the institutional research teams. So any input that we can get from our institutional research representatives as well to whoever's going to serve on that subcommittee or the working group.
We've been doing some work in that regard, so I have some information I'll share.
Do we want to talk now about who would like to maybe lead that working group and who's all interested in being part of that working group?
If I
guess
may,
I would
I think that would be best if we go through all of them and then we come back, because that way we'll can gauge how many working groups we'll have.
If we have
Okay.
3.
So we'll read through all the charges, and then we'll come back through each one for either comments or to volunteer for the working groups for those that will have separate working groups. So charge 3 is to review the space projection model as it relates to distance education courses, including the different physical space and technology needs between traditional courses, online courses, and distance education courses, as well as information on associated costs of each course type and recommended changes to the space projection model. This again was a rider included in the General Appropriations Act of the 86th Texas legislature. During the final formula funding data run this past March 2019, the coordinating board did provide, at the request of the LBB, a space model that adjusted E&G space support for fully online courses. The adjustments applied only to teaching and support space. Again, I would take any comments that we want to have at this time, but this may be another one that is a new rider that is rather large and we may want to consider a working group for. Okay. All right, hearing no other comments, we'll move on. Charge 4 is to study and make recommendations for an outcomes-based methodology for allocating the balance remaining in the Beyond Time account after the underutilized amount is allocated. The balance remaining in the Beyond Time account after the underutilized amount is allocated will be approximately $25.6 million. Now we'll go back through these. Typically what happens after the introduction of these is we will talk about subsequent meetings in the next agenda item, and we'll come back to the Formula Advisory Committee, prepared to discuss each of these charges at the September meeting. But right now, I think we'll jump back to talk about, between now and the September meeting, which ones may be more viable to have a working group to do additional work on, and then come back and report to the full committee. So the charge one in making recommendations for the appropriate funding levels, does anyone recommend a separate working committee, or all of us work on that and come prepared to discuss at the September meeting?
This is Susan. I think that's a good one to have everybody provide input on that one.
I agree. Thank you, Susan. Angie Wright was saying the same thing. So I think we, around the room, there's head nods, and I think that's a good way to proceed with charge one. Thank you. So charge two, this is the one Mr. Brown mentioned would be one that we could look at, a working group to review the expenditure study that is used for the cost matrix. If anyone would like to volunteer to lead and organize those meetings, first of all, anybody willing to lead that discussion? Okay.
I'm glad to.
Okay. Dr. Danny Gallant has volunteered to organize our meetings. I did see Mr. Daniel Harper also volunteered to be on that committee.
Vice.
He'll vice help.
Noel, do we have everyone either here or on the line? I'm just wondering if there might be some few. So maybe part of what we want to do is identify who will convene that subcommittee and who will serve as support of that subcommittee, and then ask people to, once they've had a chance to sort of read the charge and through the materials even more carefully, maybe volunteer and send an email saying that's a committee that I'd be willing to serve. If we, a suggestion that I might have, if we decide to pursue the same structure for charge 3, we might combine maybe 3 and 4. I think the 4, the be on time, there's probably people have given a lot of thought already. There was much discussion about how that money might be returned to the institutions during the last session. There was actually some discussion, as I recall. And I'm not sure that that's terribly complicated in terms, I mean, most institutions have a sense, at least as a baseline, of what they contributed into it. And so just in the interest of people's time, rather than a standalone subcommittee for just charge 4, there might be a way to combine, or have that be one, like a charge 1, something that we all discuss collectively.
I agree with the latter, that in my opinion, charge 4 might be something that I would be bring back to full committee, just because a lot of us do have a history, or you know, during this past session, a lot of input and know where our institution stands, so maybe want a voice in that charge as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that also, that charge 4 we should probably do as a full committee, but charges 2 and 3 definitely work committees.
Good.
Great. So staying on charge 2 for right now, I would like to be included in that working group. I'll take others that want to voice being included in that, but you may also want to reach out to those that couldn't join today's and ask if they'd be wanting to join that as well, so that everybody has an opportunity.
I would like to be part of that,
Okay.
please.
Perhaps Jennifer, Danny could send something after you have the initial sort of people that have expressed some interest, and then send it to those that aren't present and just say, these are those that have expressed some initial interest in serving, if you know, inviting them as well, and then they can send you and copy the chair and the vice chair.
Yes.
Mr. Harper.
I'm sorry. For those on the call, currently we have Danny Gallant, Daniel Harper, Veronica Mendez, Jason Tomlinson, Angie Wright, and myself. Does anyone on the call also want to indicate now that they'd be wanting to be part of the working group for Charge 2?
This is Susan. I would.
And this is Bob. I would like to, too.
Great, thank you very much.
I was just going to say, yeah, I'll coordinate everything. I also, last session, we had the working group. Noel Salone was on it, Bob Brown was, Susan Brown was, Mr. Gallant was,
Mr. Hugetts?
Mr. Strauser was, Mr. Hugetts was as well. So we have some history there too, and I can provide kind of the outcomes that we came up with coming out of that and share that, so we're not starting from square one. Of course, we'll start where we need to for everyone to understand it.
That'd be helpful. Noel, just to make sure, so I have Daniel Harper, Juan Munoz, Veronica Mendez, Jason Tomlinson, Angie Wright, Susan Brown, Bob Brown, and Noel Sloan. Is that?
I think
Everyone?
she was just mentioning everyone that was, did y'all two express interest? I'm sorry, I totally missed that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. On Charge 3 then is the review of the space projection model as it relates to distance education courses. And before we ask for working groups on that, I did want to ask Dr. Eklund if you could share some additional things that the coordinating board may have available to get us a working group started on that information.
Well, there's certainly the work that was done a few years back in terms of the space model study. I believe it was Rider 55 at the time. And that study looked more broadly at the space models, looked at several elements, but one thing that that model did look at had to do with online courses. So there is some information related to that, and we're certainly happy to provide any additional information. We have a report that shows online enrollments and provides that type of information broken down by the type of online, including hybrid and fully distance ed and some of the other distance ed types of programs. The associated costs, I believe, is the piece that we don't have that kind of immediate information on. So I think that would be something that the committee might want to discuss in terms of that piece, at least that I'm aware of at this time. There might have been some work done that I'm not recalling. Jennifer, do you recall any other?
I wasn't.
And anything related to
here when
costs?
They did Rider 55,
That's true,
but
that was 4 years
I do have what
ago.
they sent out, what we sent to the Legislative Budget Board this past March that adjusts the teaching and the support space for fully distance ed.
Yeah, the LBB asked us to provide 2 funding runs, one with the adjustment and one without. So we certainly have that from that information.
And I can send that to y'all after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So, just so I'm clear, the data runs that you guys did that the coordinating board sent at the LBB's request was just for those that were true fully distance ed courses, not a hybrid model.
That's my understanding. I'm looking at David Young here. Is that your understanding?
I believe that's correct. And to be
Yes.
considered fully distance, they had to be taught 85% virtually.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add. Thanks,
Okay,
Jennifer.
yeah. Yeah, so that is true. And we don't have anything that's any more than that fully 85%. We go by how it's reported in our manuals, and that's fully distanced. That's how it's defined. We can certainly provide the group with the definitions for the different types of distance education, but I think that was the focus, at least in terms of the request this time, were those fully distanced. The hybrid, obviously, there's more classroom time involved in that.
Julie, I'll apologize ahead of time for the naive question. So this charge is strictly looking at sort of space, the occupation of space, because often I hear conflated the discussion that that online courses don't occupy sort of some of the physical material elements of face-to-face. You know, faculty develop course materials in their office space. Supplemental instructors that are available at a distance are nevertheless in an office, right?
Yes,
So I just-
and we had a lot of conversations, I think, during the time of the space model study discussions around how to think about space for online courses. There are also students who will gather to have separate meetings and spaces and libraries and those types of things, as well as the office work you mentioned, thinking about other library uses. So we did discuss, and I believe it was a 50% is, Jennifer, I think that was the adjustment. It was, at least in terms of the work that was done, that was the recognition that there is in fact space involved. It's just not perhaps as much that's needed as for classroom, and that is what we were asked to provide to the LBB
This is an
as well.
inaccuracy that seems to be proliferating, that sort of online means sort of the absence of physicality or the absence of space utilization. And anyone who's developed any course online and delivered it would challenge that assertion. So that's what I'm trying to get at. So 15%?
No, well, it's courses that are online for 85% or more, but I believe it was 50% in terms of how the space model was adjusted in terms of that information. So recognizing that you'd need about half the space, and again, I think that's part of this charge, would be thinking about that, whether that's something that, you know, the committee feels is appropriate, as well as I mentioned, the costs associated, I think, is going to be perhaps the most challenging part of that. And that's in my opinion, based on what we have in terms of the data piece, at least providing you with that.
I think the other consideration is increase in technologies like Zoom technology, where there's a classroom present, but it's a distance education delivery as well. So that may be something that hasn't been considered before.
Right. And to Danny's point, not just existing technologies and platforms, but emerging ones.
Exactly.
And so how do we think ahead of the curve?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I was just going to add that the 50% isn't applied to all space, but just teaching, teaching space and I believe classrooms and labs. Is that?
Yes.
I believe that's correct.
I think it is, yeah.
I guess I would like some feedback or thoughts from the committee on how you feel about this charge. This is a new one, at least in my opinion. I mean, Rider 55 was very different than what we're being asked to do here with distance education. Is this something that we feel comfortable setting up a working group now? Would we like to look at the materials and come back and discuss as a full committee in September? Or does somebody feel comfortable in leading a working group on this now to do a lot of work between now and September? Again, working group or full committee. And I think that given the option that in September, if we felt, you know, talking with our institutions, those that would feel more comfortable leading a working group at that time, just as Dr. Glant shared that he and his team has been doing a lot on the expenditure study and feel comfortable leading that. How does the committee feel? Do they want a working group at this time for Charge 3 or to all discuss it again as a full committee in September?
Well, look, speaking for myself, I think having some discussions with our folks on campus and then revisiting this online, the possibility of a subcommittee for this online discussion in September with the understanding that at that point in time, a subcommittee may be developed would be my recommendation. Again, I think Mr. Harper said he's been here for 8 minutes. I guess now for me it's been, I don't know, 28 minutes. And but I don't believe anybody in higher education is underestimating the likely growth of this particular sector of our industry. And so to not give it due attention seems to me a bit short-sighted. Now, to give it full attention at this point in time, I think, speaking for myself, not fully entertaining the charge and the implications for our campus might be a bit premature today, but I doubt that I doubt that we leave the September meeting without a subcommittee being charged.
Yeah, I guess my feeling in putting that back on the table is like you. I think that this is something that impacts many of our institutions, and I would like to still hear the voice of all institutions and their thoughts on it. And you don't want a working group with everybody on it, or we're still the same full committee. So I think that it's something that maybe we should all think about how it impacts our institutions and be ready to discuss it as a full committee, and then follow up with setting up a working group if needed to do a lot more, data runs with the coordinating board and things like that when we are a bit more educated on what to ask them on data runs. Other thoughts?
Works for me.
Okay, so that being said, I guess all members will come prepared to discuss charges 1, 3, and 4 at the September meeting, and then the working group for charge 2 will come back and share their thoughts at the September meeting. Agenda item 5 is the discussion of dates and assignments for subsequent meetings. And in the agenda materials, you will find a calendar with future meeting dates shaded in gray. Potential dates are slated for the following Thursday mornings: September 19th, October 17th, November 7th, with December 5th and January 9th held if needed. Of course, if possible, we'd like to finish our work as soon as possible, preferably at the November meeting. That being said, when I looked at it, if we'd really like to make sure we could get as much work in to hopefully conclude at the November meeting, one thing I wanted to throw out there, and I'm just throwing it out there because it's not shaded with any other color, is possibly moving, and looking at the coordinating board if that's possible, moving the November 7th to the November 14th, just to provide us an extra week to hopefully then be able to conclude and not go into the need for a December or January meeting. But again, I'll open that up for the full committee to have discussions regarding any of the meeting dates or times.
I like the idea of moving November back to the 14th. That works better for me.
I think that Dr. Eklund's looking at it right now to see if that would even be a possibility, because I just kind of threw that out there. So give us a few minutes.
Just 1 minute. I'm checking something on the calendar because, yeah, I have Thanksgiving here as the 28th, not as the 21st, which it appears to be what's darkened in here. So that actually, I think, makes the 14th more viable. Unless you're aware of something else that is. Okay, yes, we do have our leadership conference that we schedule. Let me quickly check for that too, but I can understand why more time would be useful.
What time did you say those meetings would be? Say in the morning?
Correct me if I'm wrong, the morning begins at 11 when we have morning meetings?
We can decide whatever y'all want to do. There will more than likely be other meetings starting in here at 1. So preferably, 10:30. I mean, depending on how long you foresee them going.
We just have to be able to get flights in
Right.
as well to get here in time for the meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of the November 14th meeting, just have a regents meeting that I have items for, and they'll end right around, so that I can make it to 1 o'clock is my point. So afternoon meeting would work for me that day, but I will work with the committee as appropriate.
Yeah, and the Coordinating Board Leadership Conference is the 21st and 22nd, I believe, is what I have on my calendar, so the 14th would work. We have to check the boardroom availability, okay.
Thoughts from the committee on a 11 a.m. start or different start time?
In general, how long do the meetings, in general, how long do we have a sense? 2 hours, 3 hours, 1 hour?
It really depends on what's the agenda, I do know, depending on the group, the community colleges will often, if they have work groups, have them come and meet before the full meeting. I don't think this group has done that as frequently, but that's always an option. And I would say the meetings in the middle of the process, so tend to be the longest ones. So I would say often a couple of hours, often 2 hours. Again, but a lot depends on what's on the agenda.
Did you say that this room was taken after us? So if we started at 11, would we have a problem if we ran over to 1:30? Would
Yes.
that cause us a problem?
Yeah,
Yes, we need to be out by 1. But I didn't know that the community colleges did that. That might be something for us to think about if it ever works out for the working groups to start at if the room's available to start at a 10, and then the full committee start at a
11,
10:30 or
yeah.
11.
Or we could even find another room in this building if it's a smaller group and the broadcast isn't an issue, so we may be able to do that.
Reduces the number of trips. You're working just ahead of the general meeting.
Noel, before we move that November from the 7th to the 14th, it may be good to check availability. I know Jim, Rob, and myself will be out. We're at our board meeting the 14th, 15th, so.
And it doesn't have to be the Thursday. If we're moving one of those in November, we can move it to another day there.
Well, make
Yeah.
that one more who's out on their board meeting on the 14th.
Okay, so 14th is a bad day. I guess I was just looking at, since Thanksgiving is so late this year, giving us some time so that we could actually
What about the 12th?
finish it up. Or even, yeah, I'm open to
Does it have to
any
be
discussion.
the Thursday? If it's that week, is what we want is an extra week, maybe the 12th? That still allows you enough time to prepare your documents for the Thursday board meeting?
Are there any, you have your leadership the 21st and 22nd, but is there anything precluding us from meeting earlier that week?
No, there's not.
Even go after your board meeting, so you,
We could certainly do a doodle poll, some kind of a doodle poll or something, and, look at our calendar here and send it out to everyone with the sort of understanding that we're trying to put that meeting a little bit later than currently scheduled, and just let folks know if that's easier than everyone trying to figure it out now.
that seems good.
Does that sound good? Okay.
I'll send out a poll with the room availability, and y'all can vote.
Thank you, making it easier for me. So how do we feel about the time? Especially for the September meeting, what time would the group like to start our September meeting, or should that also be by a doodle poll?
Again, I suppose in the interest of time and those that aren't present with us today, that might be the most convenient, most efficient way to get a sense of what works for the plurality of the group.
And to be honest, I have to look at flights, so I haven't looked at those. So a doodle poll would be very helpful. Thank you. All right. Again, there's a lot of materials that were sent out in advance and some links to additional materials. But does anyone on the committee wish to request additional material at this time that would help them between now and the September meeting?
Would anyone like me to pull together the material about the distance education courses that we do have? Would that be helpful to have before that meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Julie, this is Susan. Don't shoot me. How hard would it be for y'all to look at the number of courses that are also distance ed, but also taken by students on campus?
That would not be hard. We should be able to do that. In fact, I think we've done that before, so we will add that element to the analysis.
Okay.
Any other data requests? Okay, hearing none. If there are no further questions or points of discussion, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Wright, seconded by Ms. Brown. The General Academic Institutions Formal Advisory Committee is adjourned until September 19th, and a doodle poll will go out for a time either morning or afternoon, correct? Because you have here 1. Was it already slated for 1 p.m.? No. Okay, that's a misprint, so a doodle poll will go out. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership, Chair Sloan.